Paola Jiménez eliminated more than 15 members of the cartel to avenge her colleague. What would you do if the people who destroyed your life walked free? If you knew their names, their faces, their addresses, if justice turned its back on you? Paola Jiménez had to answer that question, and her response left 15 bodies and an entire city wondering how an OXXO cashier achieved what the authorities couldn't. The early morning of January 29th dawned differently in Monterrey. There was no fog, no rain, but something heavy hung in the air of the Independencia neighborhood when patrols began surrounding an alley behind Avenida Constitucion. Neighbors heard movement from 4 a.m. Trucks, voices, radios crackling orders that no one fully understood. By 6, as the sun began to rise, yellow tape already crossed half the block. Authorities blocked access. No one could enter, no one could leave. The first thing that caught attention was the silence, an uncomfortable silence, as if even the stray dogs knew something was out of place. Agents walked with clenched jaws, some smoked nonstop, others simply stared at the ground, shaking their heads. According to the first official reports, it was a complex, multiple scene. Investigators spoke in low voices, took photographs, marked points with small numbered flags. No one wanted to give statements. Only one phrase was repeated among the uniformed officers. "We've never seen something like this at the hands of a civilian," because what they found in that alley wasn't the work of organized crime. There were no seals, no messages, no signature from any known group. It was something else. Something that didn't fit the usual patterns. There were traces of a confrontation, footprints of struggle, evidence that in that narrow space between two abandoned warehouses, something had happened that the authorities were still trying to comprehend. It wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, and it definitely wasn't planned by professionals. In total, indications related to more than 15 people linked to criminal activities in the northern zone of Nuevo Leon were accounted for. All of them had vanished from the map over a 7-month period. All had something in common. They formed part of the same criminal structure operating in the popular neighborhoods of Monterrey, and all had been tracked, identified, and confronted by a single person. A 32-year-old woman, a cashier, music at an OXXO, a single mother with 2 jobs, and no criminal record. Her name, Paola Jiménez. What no one understood was how she had reached them, how she had found them, how she had achieved what neither the authorities nor rival groups could, because Paola had no training, no contacts, no weapons, no experience. The only thing she had was a reason so deep that it had transformed her into something she never imagined being, a reason so profound that it had erased all traces of the woman who used to get up at 5 a.m. to take her son to school before opening the store. When investigators searched her apartment, they found a notebook, pages and pages filled with names, addresses, schedules, photographs taken with an old cell phone, a homemade map of routes and patterns, a meticulous record of movements that seemed straight out of a detective novel. But it wasn't fiction. It was the diary of a hunt, and what began as a desperate search for answers had turned into something much darker, something Paola never believed possible, something that had led her to cross a line with no return. The neighbors who knew her couldn't believe it. She was quiet, they said. Always kind, always helpful. We never saw her angry. But something had changed in her, something no one noticed until it was too late. Because Paola Jiménez's story isn't the story of a heroine. It's the story of an ordinary woman pushed to the limit. A woman who lost something so important that nothing else mattered, including her own humanity and what she did afterward. Well, that's what you're about to hear. But before continuing, let me know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Because what happened in Monterrey could happen anywhere. And maybe, just maybe, this is closer to you than you think. Paola Jiménez music wasn't born destined to become news. She was born in a working-class neighborhood. She grew up watching her mother clean other people's houses and learned from a young age that in life there are no shortcuts, only work, effort, and the hope that tomorrow will be a little better than today. At 19, she got pregnant. The child's father disappeared before he was born. Paola never looked for him. Music never asked for anything. She simply adjusted her apron, got a job at an OXXO on Avenida Universidad, and started building a life for herself and her son. Her routine was simple, brutal, but simple. She got up at 5 a.m., prepared breakfast, left Diego at her mother's house, and walked 20 minutes to the store. She opened at 6, closed at 2 p.m., then took the bus to the other side of the city, where she cleaned offices until 9 p.m. On weekends, she sold tamales that she prepared on Friday nights. Diego helped her wrap them. He was 11 years old and already knew his mom never rested, but he never complained because Paola didn't either. She was one of those women who don't talk much, who smile when necessary, who thank others, who apologize even when it's not their fault. At the OXXO, they knew her, music, as the quiet one. Regular customers greeted her. Some left tips. Paola always said it wasn't necessary, but she saved those coins in a jar to buy shoes for Diego. Her shift partner was Hector. Music, a 24-year-old guy studying graphic design at night and working at the store to pay for his degree. Hector had that energy Paola had lost years ago. He talked about plans, trips, opening his own studio someday. Music. She listened while stocking the sodas in the refrigerator. Sometimes Hector would tell her, "Paola, one day you're going to get out of this. You'll have your own house. Diego will go to a good school, you'll see." She smiled, not because she believed those words, but because she liked hearing them. Life at the OXXO wasn't easy. Monterrey isn't a quiet city. Robberies were common, some violent, others quick. Paola had experienced 3 holdups in 2 years. She always handed over the money without resisting. She always stayed calm. She always repeated the instructions from training. Don't make music eye contact, no arguments, hand over everything. Your life is worth more than any amount in the register. Hector was different, more impulsive, more proud. Once music, he almost confronted a guy who came in with a knife. Paola had to grab his arm and remind him it wasn't worth it. Hector calmed down, but from that day, something in him changed. He started talking about how unfair everything was, how they worked 12 hours a day for peanuts while others robbed and walked away like nothing. Paola didn't respond, just nodded, because deep down she knew he was right, but she also knew complaining music changed nothing. What Paola didn't know was that eyes were watching them, that people were taking note of their schedules, their music movements, when they were alone, and when the armored truck arrived. She didn't know that store, that small space of fluorescent lights and stacked products, had become a target, and she didn't know that in less than a week everything she knew was going to collapse. Because the tranquility Paola had built with so much effort was fragile as the glass music of the door she locked every night, believing that was enough to keep the danger out, but the danger was already inside and approaching. There were small signs easy to ignore when you live in a city where the strange is part of the daily landscape. But they were there, like cracks in a wall that no one notices until the building comes down. The first was on a Thursday afternoon. Paola was stocking cigarette boxes behind the counter when she saw a man standing in front of the beverage cooler. He wasn't grabbing anything, just looking, not at the products, at her, at Hector. The guy had tattoos on his neck, a cap, a hoodie with a hood, music, even though it was hot. Paola felt the weight of that gaze, but said nothing. Hector noticed too. "Are you going to take something?" Hector asked in a firm voice. Music. The man smiled, didn't respond, left the store without buying anything. "How weird," murmured Hector. Paola didn't comment, but that night, when closing, she checked twice that the door was securely locked. The second sign came 3 days later. A dark car, tinted windows parked in front of the store for almost an hour. No one got out. The engine never turned off. Paola saw it from the register while serving customers. Hector went out to smoke, and the car drove off as soon as it saw him approaching. "Did you see that?" Music, Hector asked when he came back in. "Yes," said Paola. Maybe they're waiting for someone, but both knew it wasn't true. In the following days, the tension grew without anyone saying it out loud. Small details that didn't fit. A customer who asked what time they closed, even though the hours were posted on the door. Another who wanted to know if there were security cameras. Paola said yes, even though she knew 2 of the 4 hadn't worked for months. Hector started carrying a box cutter in his music pocket. Paola noticed but said nothing. There was nothing to say because both felt the same, that sense that something bad was about to happen. Music, and the worst was the helplessness, because what could they do? Call the police and say what? That a man looked at them funny? That a car was parked outside? In Monterrey, music, that wasn't enough for anyone to lift a finger. So they kept working, kept opening the store every morning, kept smiling at customers, kept pretending everything was fine. But at night, Paola didn't sleep like before. She stayed awake, listening to the street noises, dogs barking, sirens in the distance, and thought about Diego. That if something happened to her, her son would be left alone. That she had to be more careful, more alert. Hector, for his part, started talking less. He became more serious, more vigilant. Sometimes Paola saw him looking out at the street with an expression she didn't like, as if he was waiting for something, as if he was ready for something. "Don't do anything stupid," Paola told him one night while closing. Hector looked at her. "I'm not going to let anything happen to us." She wanted to respond, to tell him that attitude was dangerous, that it wasn't worth it, that the money in the register wasn't worth a life, but she didn't because deep down part of her admired that bravery, that brave stupidity of someone who still believed they could make a difference. What neither of them knew was that there was no turning back, that the shadows that had been watching them for weeks had already made a decision, that the clock was ticking, and what was coming wouldn't give them time to react, because danger doesn't always warn, doesn't always give clear signs. Sometimes it hits all at once without asking, without explanations. And when that happens, there are only two options: survive or become another statistic in a city that has stopped counting its dead. Paola and Hector were about to discover which of those two options was theirs, and neither was prepared for what would come next. Tuesday, February 7th, dawned cloudy. Paola remembers that detail because Diego asked her if it was going to rain. She told him maybe, gave him a kiss on the forehead, left him money for lunch, and headed to the OXXO like every morning. Hector arrived on time. He brought coffee for both. Paola thanked him, and they began the usual routine. Open the register, count the float, check inventory. Everything normal, everything as it should be. But there was something in the air. Paola felt it from the moment she opened the door. That feeling that something was wrong. Hector was also quieter than usual, more tense. "Are you okay?" asked Paola. "Yes, just tired." She didn't insist. The first hours passed without incident. Regular customers, workers buying coffee before their shifts, students asking for loose cigarettes, everything routine, everything predictable, until it wasn't. Paola was in the back organizing boxes when she heard the doorbell, then voices, then Hector's tone changing, becoming higher, more nervous. When she came out, she saw 3 men in front of the counter, 2 blocking the door. The third had something under his jacket. Paola felt the air escape her lungs. Music. "Open the register," said the one in the middle. "Stay calm, too calm." Hector already had his hands up. It's okay, no problem." Paola approached slowly. Her fingers trembled as she entered the code. The register opened with a metallic click. There wasn't much money, maybe 3,000 pesos max. The man in the middle looked at the contents and laughed. "That's all?" "It's Tuesday," said Hector. "The bank comes on Wednesdays." The guy stared at him too intently. "Are you lying to me?" "No, I swear, you can check." There was a long, heavy silence. Paola felt something was going to happen, something bad. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't respond. Hector took a step back. "You have the money now, you can leave?" That's when everything, music, changed. The man in the middle made a gesture. The other 2 moved. Hector raised his hands higher. Wait, it's not necessary," but words no longer mattered. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but for Paola it was eternal, as if time had stopped, as if every movement was a photograph burning into her memory forever. Hector fell, Paola screamed, the men left, and when silence returned, the only thing left was the sound of Paola's breathing, rapid, ragged, desperate. She knelt beside Hector, tried to talk to him, tried to do something, anything, but there was nothing to do. Authorities arrived 16 minutes later. And music ambulance, patrols, police asking questions. Paola couldn't answer because her mind was blank, music completely blank. Someone put a blanket over her shoulders. Someone gave her water. Someone told her she had to give a statement, but she wasn't listening. She only saw the stain on the floor, the stain that wasn't there minutes before. Investigators took photos, marked evidence, talked about trajectories and angles, as if Hector was just another case, another file, another number in the city's music statistics. But for Paola, he was much more than that. He was the guy who shared his coffee, who talked about dreams, who believed the future could be better, who had tried to protect her, and now he was gone. Music. When she could finally leave, Paola walked to her mother's house. She didn't take the bus, didn't call anyone, just walked with a lost gaze, stained shoes, something broken inside that she knew would never heal. Diego saw her arrive and ran to her. He hugged her. Paola squeezed him so tight the boy complained, "Mom, you're hurting me." Music. She let go, looked into his eyes, and in that moment made a decision. Music. A decision that would change everything because Paola was no longer the same woman who had left that house in the morning. That woman had died along with Hector on the floor of an OXXO. What remained was something else, something darker, something that didn't have a name yet but soon would. The official investigation lasted exactly 4 days. 4 days in which Paola waited for someone to do something, for someone to arrest the responsible parties, for someone to tell her there was justice. But no one did anything. On the first day, a detective came, asked questions. Paola described the men as best she could. Approximate height, clothes, tattoos. The detective of music took notes, told her they'd do everything possible, asked for patience. On the second day, she got a call. They said they were reviewing security cameras in the area, analyzing possible leads, that these cases take time. On the third day, no one called. On the fourth day, she went to the public ministry to ask. A clerk received her, searched for the file on an old computer. It's still in process, she said without looking her in the eyes. We'll notify you when there are updates. Paola left, knowing the truth. There would be no updates. There would be no justice. Hector was just another name on a list of unsolved cases, one among thousands. That music night she couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall. Diego was already in bed. The house was silent, and in that silence, something began to grow inside her. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder, denser. Music. It was the certainty that if she wanted answers, she'd have to find them herself. The next day, Paola returned to the OXXO, not to work. The company had given her 2 weeks of music leave. She went just to observe. She stood on the opposite corner, hidden behind music, a taco stand, and waited. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but something told her she had to be there. Hours passed, customers came and went. The new cashier was nothing like Hector, older, more serious. Did his job without talking to anyone. When she was about to leave, she saw something. A car. The same dark car that had been parked weeks before stopped in front of the store. 2 men got out, bought cigarettes, left, but before getting in the car, one of them stood looking at the store. He smiled as if remembering something. Paola felt her blood boil. She waited for them to leave and noted the license plate on a piece of paper. She didn't know what to do with that information, but it was a start. In the following days, Paola started moving differently. She began asking carefully without raising suspicions. She talked to neighbors, other merchants, people who worked on the street, and little by little the pieces started fitting. That music group wasn't new to the area. They'd been operating for months. Small robberies, extortions, collecting protection money from local businesses. Everyone knew them. No one reported them because reporting meant becoming a target. Paola got names, not full ones, just nicknames. El Flaco, El Chino, El Greñas, enough to start tracking. One afternoon, while cleaning offices at her second job, she overheard a conversation. 2 employees talking about a bar in the Independencia neighborhood where those guys met music on weekends. Paola memorized the name of the place. The following Friday, she went. She didn't go in, just observed from outside. She saw the car, saw 2 of the men, recognized the one who had smiled in front of the OXXO. Something inside her ignited, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't act on impulse. She had to be smart, patient. She bought a notebook, started noting everything, schedules, places, movement patterns. Each day she added one more detail. Each night she reviewed her notes as if it were a map to music, something she didn't fully understand yet. Diego noticed the change. "Mom, are you okay?" "Yes, my love, just tired." But it wasn't tiredness, it was determination. Paola stopped crying, stopped waiting. Music stopped believing in official justice because she had understood something fundamental. If she wanted the responsible parties to pay, she'd have to do it herself. She didn't know how, didn't know when, but she knew she would. And as she wrote in that notebook, page after page, something inside her changed. Something that had been dormant for years, something that violence and loss had awakened. She was no longer just a mother, no longer just a cashier. She was someone with a mission, and that mission had just begun. What Paola didn't know was how far that path would take her, how far she was willing to go, and how much of herself she'd have to sacrifice in the process. But she'd find out soon, very soon. Tracking those men wasn't easy. Paola had no resources, no contacts, no experience, just time, obsession, and a rage that grew every day. The first obstacle was understanding how they moved. They weren't an organized group like the ones in the news. There were no clear hierarchies or defined structures. They were more like a small cell. 5 or 6 people working together on minor robberies, extortions to local businesses, collecting fees from taxi drivers. Paola spent her days off following them. She walked behind them at a safe distance, noted addresses, memorized faces, learned to recognize their vehicles, their routes, their schedules. She became invisible. Just another woman on the streets of Monterrey. No one noticed her, and that was her advantage. One day, she followed the one called El Chino to a house in the Topo Chico neighborhood. It was a modest building, peeling paint, rusted gate, nothing attention-grabbing. Paola sat on a bench in the park across the street, took out her cell phone and pretended to read, but really, she was taking photos. She waited 2 hours, saw 3 more people come and go, all matching the descriptions she'd collected. That night, in her notebook, she drew a map, marked the house, noted the names she knew, drew lines connecting places and people. She was building a puzzle, and each piece brought her closer to the full picture. But knowing where they were wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed to understand how they operated, who their bosses were, who protected them, because Paola had learned something fundamental. Those men didn't work alone. Someone gave them information. Someone tipped them off when it was safe to act. Someone protected them from the authorities, and that someone had to be inside the system. Paola started investigating differently. She searched old news, unsolved robberies in the area, archived cases, repeating patterns, and found something disturbing. In the last 2 years, there had been at least 12 similar assaults to the OXXO one. Same methods, same areas, same results. None solved, none with arrests. All cases assigned to the same department and all investigated by the same detective, the same one who had taken her statement, music, the same one who had promised her justice. Paola felt something break inside her. It wasn't just that they weren't doing their job, it was worse. They were allowing it to happen. One night, Paola went further. She waited outside the police station until she saw the detective leave, followed him to a parking lot, saw him get into a car and saw who was waiting inside. It was El Flaco, one of the ones who had entered the OXXO. They talked for 10 minutes. The detective received an envelope, tucked it into his jacket, got out of the car like nothing. Paola clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms. Now she understood why there were no advances, why there was no justice, why Hector was just another dusty file on a desk. Because the system was broken, because those who should protect were on the other side, because there was no one to turn to. Only her. That night, Paola made a decision. She wasn't going to report, wasn't going to trust anyone else. She was going to do what she had to do. Without help, without witnesses, she started planning. Studied each of them, their routines, their weaknesses, their vulnerable moments. El Chino lived alone, arrived home after 10 p.m., always drunk, always confident, never looked back. El Greñas worked at a mechanic shop during the day, stayed late on Tuesdays, alone, no cameras. El Flaco met with the detective on Thursdays, always at the same place, always at the same time. Paola had no weapons, no training, but she had something more powerful. She had information and patience. She knew she couldn't confront them head on. She had to be smarter, music more careful. She had to make them feel safe, make them believe no one was pursuing them, and then, when they least expected it, act. She didn't know if she'd be capable, didn't know if she'd have the courage, but every time she doubted, she closed her eyes and saw Hector falling, saw the stain on the floor, heard his voice saying he was going to protect her, and that was enough to keep going because Paola was no longer the woman waiting for justice. She was the woman who was going to create it, no matter the cost. There was an exact moment, music, when Paola stopped being who she was. It wasn't a gradual process, it was an instant, an invisible line, music she crossed without realizing until it was too late to turn back. It was a Wednesday night. 3 weeks after starting her investigation, Paola was following El Chino when she saw him enter a convenience store, the same chain where she had worked, where she had lost Hector. She saw him ask for cigarettes, smile at the cashier, pay with crumpled bills, as if music nothing, as if he hadn't destroyed lives, as if he were a normal person making a normal purchase, and something inside Paola snapped. Music? It wasn't rage anymore. It was something colder, more definitive. It was the absolute certainty that this man didn't deserve music to walk free, that every day without consequences was a mockery, an insult to Hector's memory, to all the victims they'd left behind. Paola waited for him to come out, followed him at a distance, saw him walk down dark streets, music carefree, with headphones on, oblivious to everything. It was then, music, that she realized something fundamental. She was alone. No one was going to help her. No one was going to do what had to be done. Only her. Music. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen with the notebook open in front of her. She looked at the names, the addresses, the blurry photos she'd taken with her old cell phone. Diego came in for water, saw her there, music, motionless with a lost gaze. "Mom, what are you doing?" Paola closed the notebook quickly. "Nothing, my love. Go back to sleep?" The boy looked at her with concern. "Are you angry?" She smiled. That smile she'd practiced so much it came automatically. "No, my sky, just tired." Diego approached and hugged her. Paola squeezed him tight, breathed in his scent, felt his heart beating against hers, and in that moment understood why she had to do it. It wasn't just for Hector, music. It was for Diego, for all the children growing up in a city where violence was normal, where the bad guys always won, where justice was just an empty word. If she didn't act, who would? In the following days, Paola stopped doubting. She began to music prepare, not physically, but mentally. She forced herself to see things music differently, to understand that what she was about to do had no turning back. She studied every detail, every route, every opportunity, learned about vulnerable points, how to move without being seen, how to erase traces. She didn't go to libraries, didn't search the internet music from home. She used public computers, deleted histories, changed locations constantly. She became methodical, obsessive, and a part of her, the part that was still human, screamed at her to stop, that this wasn't her, that this would change her forever. But another part, stronger, darker, told her she'd already changed, that the woman who dropped Diego off at school with music a kiss and worked 12 hours to feed him had died the day she saw Hector fall. What remained was someone new, someone without fear, someone who had understood that in a world without justice, the rules didn't apply. Paola began to disconnect emotionally. She stopped seeing those men as people. She saw them as problems, obstacles, music pieces that had to be removed. She felt no guilt, no doubt, only determination. And when she was finally ready, when she had everything planned, she took the first step. It was on a moonless night, without witnesses, without noise. Paola waited in the darkness, breathed deeply, felt the weight of what she was about to do, and acted. It wasn't like in music, the movies. It wasn't quick or clean. It was chaotic, desperate, real. But when it ended, when everything went silent, Paola looked at her hands and felt no regret. She felt relief because she had crossed the line, and on the other side of that line, she discovered something terrifying. It was easier than she thought. Music, much easier. And that, more than anything else, scared her, because now she knew she could do it again, and she would, until everyone paid, until none were left, or until they stopped her. Whichever came first. For 7 months, Paola lived music, a double life. By day, she was a mother, a worker, the quiet woman no one noticed. By night, she was something else, something even she didn't recognize when she looked in the mirror. The first was El Chino. Paola waited for him outside his music house on a Thursday night. She knew he arrived late, knew he arrived alone. She had seen him do the same route for weeks. When she confronted him, he didn't understand what was happening. Not until Paola showed him a photo of Hector. Then, music, his eyes changed. He tried to deny it, then tried to laugh, finally tried to run. He didn't get far. Paola hadn't planned what to do after. She just reacted, used what was at hand. It was instinctive, brutal, definitive. When it was over, her hands shook as she dragged. Music, she breathed heavily, but she didn't cry. She cleaned up, checked for no witnesses, and left. The next morning, the news reported a discovery in Topo Chico. Authorities spoke of settling scores, violence between groups. No one mentioned an OXXO cashier. Paola went to work like any other day. No one noticed anything different about her. The second music was El Greñas. 2 weeks later, Paola found him closing the mechanic shop. A Tuesday night, she offered him money to check her car, which she'd left parked 2 blocks away. He accepted, followed her, never returned to the shop. This time, Paola was more careful, more calculating. She'd learned from the first time, knew what to avoid, how to erase traces. Authorities found the body 3 days later. Same conclusion, violence between criminals. And so it continued, one by one. Each name in her notebook was crossed out. Each face she'd memorized disappeared from the streets. Paola didn't use weapons. She couldn't get them without leaving a trace. She used what she found, what was available. Creativity born of necessity. Sometimes it took weeks to plan. Other times it was opportunistic. She took advantage of mistakes, oversights. The criminals were too confident. They thought themselves untouchable. That arrogance was their weakness. By the 5th, Paola felt nothing anymore. She didn't tremble, didn't doubt. She did it with the same coldness she used to stock boxes at the OXXO. But there was a problem. The police started noticing the pattern. All that disappeared belonged to the same group. All had operated in the same area. All had participated in violent robberies. Authorities began investigating. They thought it was a rival group or a vigilante with connections to organized crime. They never suspected a cashier. Paola knew it. She read the news, heard the rumors, and used that information to her advantage. The corrupt detective was the 10th. Paola followed him for a month. Studied every movement, every vulnerable point. Confronted him in the parking lot where he met El Flaco. Showed him music photos, evidence of his betrayal. He tried to negotiate, offered money, then threatened. But Paola was no longer the woman scared by threats. When authorities found him, they thought he'd been eliminated by the same criminals he protected. No one investigated further. By then, Paola had eliminated 14 people, all connected to the group that attacked the OXXO, all responsible directly or indirectly for what happened to Hector. But there was one more. The leader, the one who gave the orders, the one who planned the assault. He called himself El Patron, operated from the shadows. No one had seen him in months. It took Paola 3 weeks to find him. He lived in a guarded house on the outskirts of Monterrey, had security, cameras, dogs. But Paola was no longer an amateur. She'd learned, evolved, studied the guards' routines, camera blind spots, patrol schedules, and one night entered silently, invisibly. When El Patron saw her in his bedroom, he couldn't believe it. A woman alone, apparently unarmed. He tried to reach his weapon. He didn't make it. Paola forced him to listen, told him about Hector, about every life he'd ruined, about every family he'd destroyed. He tried to justify himself, said it was just business, that he didn't pull the trigger, that he only gave orders. Paola didn't respond, she just acted. And when she left that house, she left behind 15 years of unsolved crimes, 15 families who would never know there had been justice, 15 names that would no longer appear in police reports. Paola returned to her apartment at dawn, showered, changed clothes, prepared Diego's breakfast. "Good morning, Mom," the boy said, yawning. "Good morning, my love. Everything normal? Everything as always?" No one suspected anything, and it would have continued that way if not for Paola making a mistake, a small mistake that would change everything. The mistake was a photograph. Paola had been meticulous for months, never left evidence, never stayed at the scenes, always erased her traces, but that last night at El Patron's house, she forgot something. Her cell phone, she'd used it to light the way in the dark, left it on a table while acting, and when she left with shaking hands and a clouded mind, she forgot it. 3 days later, authorities arrived to investigate the scene. They found the phone, unlocked it, and there it was all. Surveillance photos, notes, addresses, maps, the digital notebook of a 7-month hunt. At first, they couldn't believe it. The device music belonged to a woman with no record, a cashier, single mother, no criminal connections, but the evidence was undeniable. The operation to arrest her was organized in silence. They didn't want to alert her, didn't want her to escape. They arrived at her apartment on a Tuesday morning. Paola was preparing Diego's breakfast. Music. The boy was getting dressed for school. When they knocked on the door, Paola knew immediately what was happening. She opened calmly. Didn't try to run, didn't try to resist. She just asked for 5 minutes. They let her talk to Diego. She told him she had to go away for a while, that his grandmother would take care of him, that she loved him more than anything in the world. The boy cried. He didn't understand why his mom had to go, why there were so many police. Paola hugged him one last time, breathed in his scent, memorized his face, and then left. The news music exploded in the media the next day. Vigilante cashier responsible for 15 unsolved cases. Headlines called her everything. Heroine, killer, avenger, psychopath. The city divided. Some said she did what the authorities couldn't, cleaned the streets of criminals the system protected, that she was a victim pushed to the limit. Others said there was no excuse, that she'd crossed a line, that vigilante justice wasn't justice. And Paola said nothing. In her statement, she only repeated one phrase: "I did what I had to do." The trial lasted 4 months. The evidence was overwhelming. Music. There was no possible defense, but something strange happened during the process. Witnesses began appearing. Families of victims of that criminal group, people who had lost loved ones in robberies, extortions, kidnappings. They didn't justify what Paola had done, but they understood why she'd done it, because they all had felt that same helplessness, that same rage, that same desperation of seeking justice and finding none. The difference was that Paola had acted. The verdict was inevitable, guilty on all charges. The sentence, 50 years without possibility of parole. Paola heard the ruling without flinching. She didn't cry, didn't protest. Music just nodded because she knew it would end this way. She knew it from the moment she crossed that line. From the first night, from the first name crossed out in her notebook. They sent her to a maximum security prison. There, in a small cell, Paola spent her days in silence. She didn't talk to other inmates, didn't cause problems. She just thought about Hector, music about Diego, about all the decisions that had led her there. Diego visited her once a month. His mother brought him. The boy had grown. He no longer cried, but he looked at her differently, with a mix of love and fear, as if he didn't know if he was talking to his mother or a stranger. Paola tried to explain, to tell him everything she did was to, music, protect him, so he could grow up in a safer world. But how do you explain to a child that his mother had crossed to the other side, that she'd become what she swore to fight? There were no words, only silence. And that silence was heavier than any sentence because Paola had won and lost at the same time. She'd avenged Hector, eliminated all the responsible parties, but she'd lost her freedom, lost her son, lost her soul. And now, in that cold cell, with gray walls and music, the sound of bars closing in the distance, Paola wondered if it had been worth it. If all the pain she'd caused, not just to the criminals, but to their own families, to Diego, to herself, had served any purpose because the uncomfortable truth music was this. The city was still dangerous, robberies continued, music new groups filled the void she'd left, as if nothing had changed, as if all those months of hunting had been just a blink in the infinite history, music of violence consuming the streets. Inside the prison, Paola became a legend. The other inmates, music respected and feared her at the same time. They knew her story, knew what she'd done, and many secretly admired her, because several of them had also been victims, had also lost someone, had also felt that suffocating helplessness of seeking justice and finding only indifference. But Paola didn't want admiration, didn't want respect, she just wanted silence. The prison psychologists evaluated her multiple times. They looked for signs of remorse, trauma, emotional breakdown. But Paola gave them simple, direct, empty answers. "Do you feel guilty for music, what you did?" they asked. "Would you do it again?" Paola stayed silent. That question haunted her every night because the honest answer music was complicated. Would she do it again if she could turn back time? Would she choose the same path? The rational answer was no. She'd lost everything, her freedom, her son, her life. But the emotional answer, that was different because when she closed her eyes, she still saw Hector falling, still heard his last words, still felt that brutal helplessness of not being able to do anything. And if the only way to find peace was to cross the line, then yes, she'd do it again 1,000 times. A year after her imprisonment, Paola received a letter. It was from Hector's mother. The woman had taken months to decide to write. The letter was brief. It said she'd music, heard everything at the trial, that she knew what Paola had done, and that although she couldn't justify it, she understood. It ended with a phrase Paola read over and over until she memorized it. "My son would have done the same for you." Paola kept that letter under her pillow. It was all she had, the only thing that reminded her not everything was lost, that someone somewhere understood. But the nights were still long, and the weight of what she'd done didn't disappear. It just became more familiar, like a scar that hurts when the weather changes. Diego stopped visiting when he turned 14. His grandmother explained it was better that way, that he needed to move on with his life, build his future without the weight of an imprisoned mother. Paola understood. She didn't protest. But the last image she had of her son, music taller, voice changing, looking at her with eyes that were no longer a child's, haunted her every day. What did he think of her? Did he hate her? Did he understand? Would he ever forgive her? Those questions had no answers, only silence. And that silence was her true punishment, harder than the bars, heavier than the years left to serve, because Paola had discovered something no judge had told her. The real punishment wasn't prison. It was living with the certainty that she'd won the battle but lost the war, that she'd avenged Hector but destroyed her own life, that she'd sought justice and found only emptiness. And now, in that cell, with years stretching before her like an endless desert, Paola finally felt something she hadn't felt in months. Fear. Not fear of prison, not fear of the other inmates, not fear of violence. Fear of herself. Fear of discovering that the woman who had been the kind cashier, the loving mother, the tireless worker, had died forever, and all that remained was this broken, empty, unrecognizable version. A stranger trapped in her own skin, waiting for the end. It's been 3 years since Paola entered the prison. 3 years of identical routine, music, get up, eat, work in the laundry, return to the cell, sleep, repeat. The outside world turning without her. Monterrey continued being the same violent city. The news still reported robberies, assaults, disappearances, as if nothing had changed, as if her sacrifice had been just a whisper in the midst of a hurricane. Diego is 15 now. Paola knows because her mother sends a photo every birthday. No letters, no messages, just a photograph. In the most recent one, Diego is at a soccer game, smiling, looking healthy, happy. Paola keeps that photo next to the letter from Hector's mother. They are her only treasures. The only things that remind her she once had a life outside these music walls. Sometimes she wonders if Diego thinks of her, if he tells his friends his mother is in prison, or if he simply says he doesn't have one, that he grew up without a mother. Maybe it's easier that way, less complicated, less painful. In the prison, Paola has changed. She's no longer the quiet woman who observed from the shadows, nor is she the avenger who eliminated names from a list. She's something in between, something indefinable. The other inmates seek her out when they have problems. Paola listens, doesn't judge, doesn't advise, she just listens. Because she's learned that everyone carries something, that every person in that place crossed a line they shouldn't have, that everyone has a story that led them there, and no one is completely guilty or completely innocent. One day, a new inmate arrived in her cell. She was Music Young, 22 years old. She was there for attacking the man who had hurt her little sister. Was it worth it? She asked Paola. What you did, was it worth it? Paola stayed silent for a long time, looking through the small barred window that overlooked a concrete yard. Finally, she answered, I don't know. And it was true because 3 years later, Paola still didn't have a clear answer. Was it worth it? Did she avenge Music Hector? Yes. She eliminated 15 criminals who would never face justice. She also protected others from suffering what she suffered. Maybe. But at what cost? She lost her freedom, lost her son, lost her identity, and worst of all, she became what she despised. Someone who takes lives, someone who decides who deserves to live, and music who doesn't, because that's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to admit. When you cross that line, when you take justice into your own hands, you become part of the problem. Paola knew it from the beginning, but chose to go forward anyway because sometimes the pain is so great that all you want is to stop feeling it. And revenge, even if false, even if empty, gives you that illusion of control, that sense that you did something, that you didn't stand by with arms crossed. But when the dust settles, when the noise fades, you realize you gained nothing, you only lost more. Paola will spend the rest of her life in prison. There are no pending appeals, no hope of parole. Only years and years of gray walls, bars, silence. But there's something she's learned in these Music 3 years, something she never imagined she'd learn. That real justice doesn't come from eliminating the enemy. It comes from healing, from rebuilding, from finding peace without destroying others in the process. Music. And that's the bitterest lesson of all because it came too late. Paola looks at Diego's photo music one more time before sleeping. She touches his face with her fingertips and allows herself to imagine a different life, one where music she chose another path, one where she trusted the system even if imperfect, music one where she sought help instead of revenge. Maybe in that life, Diego would still visit her. Maybe she'd still have a son, music, but that life doesn't exist. Only this one does, and this is her reality, her sentence, her eternal punishment. Paola closes her eyes. Tomorrow will be another identical day, and the next one too, and the next, until the years turn into decades, until Diego is an adult, until maybe, just maybe, he decides to seek her out, listen to her, understand music, or not. Maybe he'll never return, and Paola will have to live with that, with the possibility that her son will never know why she did what she did, that he'll only remember her as the woman who chose revenge over him. And that possibility hurts more music than any sentence, more than any cell, more than any lost year. Because in the end, true justice isn't eliminating the guilty, it's living with the consequences of your decisions. And Paola Jiménez will live with hers until the last day of her life in a cold cell, alone, remembering everything she had and everything she lost. This was the story of Paola Jiménez, the OXXO cashier who became a vigilante. The woman who sought revenge and found only emptiness. The mother who sacrificed everything for a music moment of justice that never came. It's not a story with an easy moral. There are no heroes here. Only victims creating more victims, only pain generating music, more pain. And maybe that's the true lesson, that violence never solves anything. It only perpetuates the cycle, only leaves more wounds, more broken families, more destroyed lives. If you've made it this far, I invite you to subscribe to the channel to keep listening to more amazing stories like this. Click on the next video on the screen because there are more stories waiting, more uncomfortable truths, more realities that need to be told. Thanks for listening.